Earlier this week, it was reported that Emirates Team New Zealand had launched their second new foil within the space of 5 days. I'm going to tell you why that isn't true, where the confusion lies, but also what are the interesting features that we should really be paying attention to with Team New Zealand's new foils. Now, I wasn't going to release a video this month, however, this really caught my attention. First of all, because it's a lot of foils to launch in a short space of time, but also it would take Emirates Team New Zealand over their quota of test foils. They're only allowed 4 and a legal 5th foil. I could tell you though that this is just blatantly not true, although I can see where the confusion has come from. So let's look at the foil they launched on the 16th of January, and there are clues in here as to where the confusion is going to come from. Now, when I look at this foil, there's some things that instantly jump out at me as being interesting. First of all, when we look on the kind of plan view of the foil, top down to looking at the kind of area shape, we see that this foil has a pretty straight leading edge and then an elliptical kind of forward sweep in the trailing edge. And this is something we've seen on no foil to date in the America's Cup. So that in itself is really interesting. Secondly though, when we look at the profile view, the head-on view, we see that there are some asymmetries to this foil. If we look at the port hand side of the wing, we see this kind of nice sweeping wingtip, which kind of merges into the main body of the wing. Whereas when we look at the starboard side of the foil, we see a much straighter general wing and then a more abrupt wingtip on it. Now, this is interesting because, well, first of all, it shows 2 wingtip designs, and you would probably expect 2 wingtip designs on a foil where, one tip is going to be breaking free of the surface a lot. Now, what's interesting really here is that the final foils they build for the race boat have to be symmetrical. So an asymmetrical foil like this just won't be allowed come race day. Nevertheless, by compacting 2 designs into one wing, they get to test 2 concepts, and they test those 2 concepts by mounting the foil on different sides of the boat. So you can test how each different types of wingtip interacts both with the surface when it's mounted on the outboard side, but how it functions as your main kind of loading part of the wing when it's held deeper in the water on the inboard side. And you just switch it from side to side of the boat. And this is where the confusion has come from in the reporting, because only a few days later, a week later, they've switched this foil from starboard to port, and it's been incorrectly reported as an additional wing when it's just them doing kind of what I expected them to do all along with an asymmetrical foil, and that was to test it on both sides of the boat. Now, is this a really clever Kiwi workaround on getting more test foils or test concepts out of their quota? Well, it isn't. Making asymmetrical foils during this testing phase isn't something new, and it's not something that's been pioneered by Team New Zealand either. Luna Rossa, right from the first days of their foils, have tested asymmetrical wingtips, asymmetrical fences on their foils, and with first foil, which saw with large kind of like actual shape differences in the wing, not just kind of details, was Alinghi with their tubercle wing, where they had tubercles on one side of the wing, one side of the fuselage, and they just had a straight leading edge on the other side. So Alinghi really kind of like paved the way, I think, with this kind of asymmetrical design. Did see it, I think, from the Kiwis' second foil onwards, had a slight difference in curve either side, and we saw a few revisions of that. What it does tell you though is something about their kind of testing parameters. Now, when you do something like this and have a wing which is half and half, what it does is it kind of like makes it harder for you to attribute the data for the performance of the yacht as a whole to one design or one feature or the other, because both of them are on the same foil at the same time, and it makes it really hard to determine whether you're going fast because X wingtip was low in the water, or you're going fast because Y wingtip was sticking out of the water. So kind of separating out those two features in the data is harder when you do something like this. But the advantage you do get is you get to test more features within your foil quota. I've also found it interesting over the lifetime of the testing, we've seen more and more external cameras mounted on the foils. And what this tells me is that actually some of the raw data and raw metrics in terms of speed through the water and the your VMGs, your true wind speeds, putting all that together to work out the performance of the yacht is still has loads of kind of environmental noise in that data, and probably makes it quite difficult for them to actually get a performance kind of tick for any design or not. And they've kind of reverted to cameras on the foils because probably a lot of the testing is maybe more basic than that in terms of just looking at the foil with a camera, drawing stripes on the foil and looking visually where the flow separates from the foil under different loading and recording that, switching it to the other side of the boat, then having another look at the other side of the foil and looking at how the flow separates from that foil or that wingtip. And it's not so much about the overall performance of the yacht, it's about validating your model by mapping where the separation is on the foil and then hoping that will give you the information you need to design a successful foil. So when we compare this fourth foil to the third foil, I think the first thing we see is about the global shape of it, the kind of top-down view, and we see a straight leading edge and sweep in the trailing edge. Now, in the past, most of the foils have had a pretty straight, about either taper in both edges or slightly more taper in the leading edge. And this kind of makes sense from an entrainment point of view for ventilation. If the tip of the foil, as it breaches the water, is kind of angled forward as it goes deeper, that makes it harder for air to be sucked down because it's being sucked down against the flow. Now, this does have me stumped because it goes against my layman's thinking on the shapes before, and I would have thought a shape like this would be more susceptible to entrainment. The flip side, though, is you do see these shapes on many glider aircraft with really efficient wings, and perhaps Emirates Team New Zealand are looking at the trade-off between a design that may get slightly more ventilation, but on the whole is a more efficient kind of plan shape. When we look at Emirates Team New Zealand's foils over this campaign, I think one of the clearest trends we see is in the move from a blended foil, which were a hallmark feature of their foils from the last America's Cup. With their first test foil, we saw quite a large kind of blended in bulb. The second foil had more bulbous bulb, which you would associate with kind of a keel bulb on a yacht normally. And then their third foil had much more torpedo shape, so like a cylinder with a ball point on it. And then finally, this final foil again follows that kind of torpedo look, maybe with a slightly sharper nose on it. One other aspect that I like the look at on this new foil is that the leading edge of the arm strut that comes down to the bulb or to the intersection, that seems to be ever so slightly angled forward. Now, going back to what I said about the kind of entrainment, ventilation of foils, angling that forward reduces it because the air has to work its way down the foil against the flow. And this is something we see on moth foils where the foils are raked forward to reduce the chances of ventilation. Now, to me, the sequencing and release of Emirates Team New Zealand foils kind of typifies their whole approach to development. Now, on the face of it, a lot of their development has been a bit meh. Like, the whole campaign looks really well polished. The only really big hiccup was the smashing of the nose of the AC-40, but even that they recover from really quickly. But if you actually look at the Emirates Team New Zealand programme, I'd be hard to put my finger on any unique points that Emirates Team New Zealand have really brought to the table in this cycle. Their very first foil was something quite radical, and I think if you are going to go for a radical foil design, you really need to start out with it to give you enough time to refine it. So that kind of makes sense, but they kind of obviously decided that wasn't that great because they've dropped away from it, and their subsequent two foils have been more like refinements of the concept from the previous America's Cup. So nothing groundbreakingly new there. Even on deck, on Tiruhutai, they've got the new jib 3D sheeting system, but that was something we saw from Ineos before. I've mentioned in this video already how they've been using asymmetric foils to get more of a test quota, but again, that was an idea that we saw come from Luna Rossa and Delingi. We've seen the cameras mounted on the foils in these pods. Again, Luna Rossa pioneered that and other teams have followed. So there's nothing really that you'd say Emirates Team New Zealand have put out there which has been picked up and taken by other teams. And that's not a dig at Emirates Team New Zealand. I'm sure they're not out of ideas, but they know when to release innovative technology. There's nothing that you could really say other teams have gained from seeing Team New Zealand on the water, apart from a fear of how well organised they are. And this final foil, which has got something a little bit new in the kind of plan shape of it, it's actually probably come too late for the other teams to copy because they've already gone to manufacture on their race foils. So you tell me, come the Cup, come the launch of the race boats, will we see foils with straight leading edges and this curved Spitfire trailing edge? Or has this just been a final roll of the dice by Emirates Team New Zealand after they've exhausted their otherwise pretty linear development process? That's all from me today. Catch you around.